The strangest thing about first love is that you never expect it to walk back into your life wearing a face you barely recognize. The dinner rush always started the same way at Bellefonte. The front doors swung open. The scent of garlic, fresh bread, and roasted herbs filled the air. Glasses clinked. Conversations blended together beneath the soft glow of hanging lights. And for 6 years, I had moved through it all like clockwork. Smile. Take orders. Refill drinks. Repeat. At 29, I knew every table, every regular customer, every squeaky floorboard near the kitchen entrance. The restaurant felt more familiar than my own apartment. That Friday evening had started no differently. Rain tapped gently against the front windows. A jazz piano track drifted through hidden speakers. My feet already ached from the double shift I'd picked up after another waitress called out sick. I balanced a tray of sparkling water glasses against my shoulder and forced myself to keep moving. Rent was due next week. Student loans were due next week. Life didn't care if I was tired. Table 12 needs menus, my manager called. Got it, I answered. I grabbed 2 menus and headed toward the front of the restaurant. The hostess was greeting a new group of guests. For men, expensive suits, expensive watches, the kind of customers who never looked at menu prices. Nothing unusual. Bellefonte attracted plenty of wealthy people. But then the man standing in the center turned slightly toward the light. My feet stopped moving. The menu slipped in my hands. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. No, my mind rejected it immediately. Absolutely not. The man was taller than I remembered. Broader. More confident. His dark suit fit perfectly. His hair was neatly styled. There was a calm authority in the way he stood, as if he expected the entire room to adjust itself around him. But it was his eyes that shattered me. Those eyes hadn't changed. Not after all these years. Not after 12 years of silence. Adrian Mercer. The name crashed through my chest so suddenly I nearly dropped the menus. My first love. My first heartbreak. The boy who had disappeared from my life without a goodbye. 12 years ago, Adrian had been 17. Smart. Funny. The kind of boy who stayed after class helping other students even when nobody asked him to. The kind of boy who used to leave handwritten notes inside my locker. The kind of boy who promised we'd leave our small town together someday. Then one morning, he was simply gone. No explanation. No phone call. No letter. Nothing. At first I thought he'd come back. Then I thought something terrible had happened. Eventually, I learned the hardest lesson of my life. Sometimes people leave. Sometimes they never explain why. I had spent years convincing myself I was over him. Years building a life that didn't include his name. Yet one glimpse of him standing inside my restaurant made every carefully built wall crack. Emma, my coworker, whispered beside me. You okay? I blinked. Yeah. My voice sounded distant. I'm fine. But I wasn't. Because Adrian wasn't alone. The men surrounding him weren't friends meeting for dinner. They moved differently. Alert. Controlled. Respectful. One stepped aside to open a path before Adrian even started walking. Another quietly scanned the room before taking his seat. It felt less like a dinner reservation and more like an arrival. Adrian's gaze drifted across the restaurant. For one terrifying second, I thought he might not recognize me. Then his eyes landed on mine. The world went silent. The music disappeared. The conversations faded. There was only that look. Recognition. Immediate and undeniable. His expression never changed. Not surprise. Not shock. Just a quiet stillness that somehow hurt even more. He knew exactly who I was. After 12 years, he knew. Then one of the men beside him leaned forward and said something I wasn't supposed to hear. Just 3 words. 3 words that turned the blood cold in my veins. Boss Mercer is here. And suddenly I understood that the boy I had loved was gone. The man standing in front of me now belonged to an entirely different world. I stood frozen beside the service station long after Adrian disappeared into the private dining section. The restaurant noise gradually returned around me, but it sounded distant, muffled, as if I were hearing it through water. My hands would not stop shaking. 12 years. 12 years. And somehow one glance had dragged me backward through time. Emma, table 7 needs their check. My manager's voice snapped me back to reality. Right. Sorry. I forced my legs to move. Forced myself to smile. Forced myself to act normal. But every few seconds my eyes drifted toward the private dining room. Toward the closed door behind which Adrian Mercer sat. The last time I had seen him, Neither of us could even drive legally after dark without our parents asking questions. Now he arrived surrounded by men in tailored suits and quiet authority. Nothing about it made sense. I delivered a check to table 7, refilled drinks at table 4, cleared empty plates from table 9. My body moved automatically while my mind traveled 12 years into the past. Back to a town so small, everyone knew everybody else's business. Back to football games under Friday night lights. Back to afternoons spent studying at the public library because neither of us could focus when we were together. Adrian had always been different. Not in the dramatic way people say after someone becomes successful. Different in the quiet way that mattered. While everyone else rushed to leave class, he stayed behind helping teachers stack chairs. While other boys competed to be the loudest person in the room, Adrian listened. Really listened. The first time we spoke, I had dropped my history binder in the hallway. Papers scattered everywhere. Everyone walked around me. Adrian stopped. He helped gather every page. Then he spent 10 minutes organizing them into the correct order because he noticed my color-coded tabs. "You seem like somebody who likes things organized," he had said. I remember laughing. I remember noticing how serious he looked before he smiled. After that, we became friends. Then something more. My chest tightened at the memory. First love sounds simple when people say it. It never feels simple when you are living it. Everything feels larger. Every conversation matters. Every touch lingers. Every promise feels permanent. Adrian and I used to sit on the hood of his old pickup truck overlooking Miller Lake. We would watch the sunset and talk about the future. He wanted to leave town. So did I. We spent hours imagining where life might take us. Chicago, New York, Boston, anywhere except the place where everyone expected our lives to stay exactly the same. One day, he used to say, "We will look back and laugh at this town." I believed him. More importantly, I believed in him. Then one morning, everything changed. Adrian did not show up for school. At first, nobody worried. Then a week passed. Then 2. Rumors spread quickly. Some people said his family had moved away overnight. Others claimed they had financial problems. A few insisted they had seen strange vehicles outside his house before he disappeared. Nobody knew the truth, including me. I called his phone every day. No answer. I sent messages. Nothing. I even drove past his house after school. The windows were dark. The driveway was empty. It was as if someone had erased him. The worst part was not losing him. The worst part was never understanding why. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket, pulling me back to the present. Another order ready for pickup. Another customer waiting. Another reminder that life kept moving whether I was ready or not. I grabbed the tray and headed toward the dining room. As I passed the private section, the door opened unexpectedly. One of the suited men stepped out. He spoke quietly into an earpiece before moving aside. Then Adrian emerged behind him. My breath caught instantly. 12 years ago, I had spent every day wondering where he went. Now he stood less than 20 feet away. Older, stronger, unreadable. His eyes found mine immediately. Not by accident. Not by coincidence. As if he had been looking for me too. For 3 long seconds, neither of us moved. Then Adrian glanced toward the hostess stand and spoke calmly to one of his associates. The man nodded. A moment later, the hostess approached me. "Emma," she said quietly, "the gentleman in the private room requested you personally for service tomorrow night." My heart skipped. Requested me. She nodded. By name. And suddenly I knew this reunion was not over. It was only beginning. The next afternoon dragged slower than any shift I could remember. Every clock in Bellefonte seemed broken. Every minute stretched into 10. I arrived 30 minutes early, hoping work would distract me, but it only made things worse. The private dining room sat empty when I checked. The polished table was already set. Crystal glasses reflected the soft lighting. Fresh flowers rested in the center. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. Yet my stomach twisted every time I walked past the door. Adrian Mercer had requested me by name. The fact should not have mattered. It should have felt like a customer preference. Instead, it felt like the opening move in a conversation that had been delayed for 12 years. By 6 o'clock, the dinner crowd began arriving. By 7, the restaurant was nearly full. Rain tapped against the windows again, almost identical to the night before. I carried plates, greeted guests, and repeated the same polite phrases I had used thousands of times. But my attention kept drifting toward the entrance. At exactly 7:23, the front doors opened. I knew it was him before I looked. The atmosphere changed first. Conversations softened. Staff members straightened instinctively. Even the hostess seemed more careful with her smile. Adrian entered wearing a charcoal suit that somehow made him look even more intimidating than the night before. 3 associates followed behind him. Not bodyguards exactly. Something more professional. More disciplined. They took their places around the restaurant without drawing attention to themselves. Adrian headed directly toward the private dining room. Halfway there, he stopped. His eyes met mine. Once again, the room disappeared. It happened so quickly, I almost hated myself for noticing it. The same steady gaze. The same calm focus. 12 years vanished in a heartbeat. Then he nodded politely, as though greeting an old acquaintance. Nothing more. No smile. No explanation. Just a nod. The gesture somehow hurt more than if he had ignored me completely. An hour later, my manager approached carrying a tablet. "Private room is ready for ordering," he said. "You are handling it." I swallowed hard. Of course. My hands felt strangely cold as I pushed open the dining room door. Adrian sat alone at the center of the long table. The others were gone. The sight surprised me. Somehow I had expected a room full of executives or advisors. Instead, it was just him. One man. One table. One impossible history sitting between us. "Good evening," I managed. My voice sounded professional. Barely. Adrian stood immediately. That surprised me even more. He had not stood for anyone else all evening. "Emma." Hearing my name in his voice after 12 years sent a crack through every wall I had built. I focused on my order pad. "Can I start you with something to drink?" "Still water." The answer came softly. "Thank you." I wrote it down even though I would have remembered it forever. Silence settled between us. Heavy. Familiar. Dangerous. I turned to leave. "You still twist your ring when you are nervous." I froze. My fingers immediately stopped moving. He was right. The silver ring on my right hand had been spinning unconsciously since I entered. A habit from high school. A habit almost nobody noticed. My chest tightened. Slowly, I looked back at him. Adrian's expression remained calm. But there was something different in his eyes now. Not power. Not confidence. Something older. Something sadder. "You remember that?" I asked quietly. "I remember everything." The words landed harder than they should have. I looked away first. I had to. Because suddenly I was 17 again. Standing beside Miller Lake. Listening to promises that never came true. "What would you like to order?" I asked. Adrian studied me for several seconds before answering. "Actually, Emma, there is something I have wanted for a very long time." My pulse quickened. Every instinct told me the next few words would change everything. Then Adrian leaned back slightly and said, "I would like 5 minutes of honest conversation." Because 12 years is a very long time to disappear without explaining why. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The restaurant sounds beyond the private dining room faded into a distant hum. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The candle in the center of the table flickered once. Adrian never looked away. 12 years ago, that steady gaze had made me feel safe. Now it made me feel exposed. 5 minutes. I repeated quietly. "That is all." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. It disappeared almost immediately. I figured asking for 12 years might be unreasonable. The answer caught me off guard. For a second I saw the boy I used to know. Then the moment vanished. I tightened my grip on the order pad. "You disappeared, Adrian." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "You left without a single explanation." His expression darkened. Not with anger. With regret. Real regret. The kind that settles deep inside a person and stays there. I know. 2 simple words. Yet they carried more weight than any excuse could have. I waited. Part of me wanted to walk away. Another part had been waiting 12 years to hear what came next. Adrian folded his hands together on the table. Everything changed very quickly. The calm confidence that surrounded him seemed to fade slightly. 1 week I was worrying about college applications. The next week my entire family was being pulled into something I barely understood. I remained silent. Adrian looked down briefly before continuing. My father had business relationships I knew nothing about. Agreements. Commitments. People who expected things from him. He paused. When those relationships collapsed, our lives changed overnight. His words were careful, measured, like someone choosing each sentence with precision. "Why not call me?" I asked. "Why not send one message?" Pain flickered across his face. "Because I was told not to." I laughed bitterly before I could stop myself. That is not an answer. It is the truth. The room fell quiet again. Adrian looked toward the rain-covered window. For the first time since seeing him again, he looked tired. Not physically tired. Emotionally exhausted. Emma, there were people making decisions around me. I was 17. I thought if I followed their instructions, everyone I cared about would be protected. My chest tightened. Protected from what? Adrian hesitated. Then he shook his head slightly. That is a longer conversation. Frustration surged through me. You do not get to appear after 12 years and tell me half the story. His eyes returned to mine. You are right. The immediate agreement surprised me. You deserve the entire truth. Something about the way he said it made my pulse quicken. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was not defending himself. He simply sounded determined. As if he had already decided this conversation would happen no matter how uncomfortable it became. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the memories in my head with the man sitting across from me. The Adrian I remembered had dreamed about becoming an engineer. This Adrian commanded rooms without raising his voice. The Adrian I remembered drove an old pickup truck with a broken radio. This Adrian arrived surrounded by people who treated him like the most important person in the city. They felt like two different people. Yet somehow they shared the same eyes, the same quiet focus, the same habit of studying me as if every detail mattered. Why come back now? I asked. The question slipped out before I could stop it. Adrian's expression softened. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. My heartbeat quickened. He carefully removed a folded piece of paper. The edges were worn from age. He placed it gently on the table between us. I looked down. My breath caught instantly. It was a photograph. Old. Slightly faded. Two teenagers sitting on the hood of a pickup truck overlooking Miller Lake. Me and Adrian. 17 years old. Smiling at a future we thought belonged to us. My throat tightened. You kept this? I whispered. Adrian nodded once. I kept everything. The answer hit harder than I expected. 12 years of anger suddenly collided with 12 years of unanswered questions. I did not know what to feel anymore. Before I could respond, a soft knock sounded at the dining room door. One of Adrian's associates stepped inside. The man leaned close and quietly said something I could not hear. Adrian's expression changed immediately. Not fear. Not concern. Recognition. As though he had expected the interruption. The associate handed him a small envelope. Adrian accepted it and dismissed the man with a nod. Then he looked back at me. Slowly, he slid the envelope across the table, directly toward my side. What is this? I asked. Adrian's gaze never left mine. The first piece of the truth. My fingers hovered above the envelope. Suddenly, I was no longer thinking about the years we had lost. I was thinking about what I was about to discover. And judging by the look in Adrian's eyes, whatever was inside had the power to change everything I thought I knew about the night he vanished. My fingers hesitated above the envelope. The restaurant around us continued operating as if nothing unusual was happening. But inside that private dining room, it felt like the entire world had narrowed to a single piece of paper. Adrian remained silent. He did not rush me. He did not explain. He simply watched as I finally reached forward and picked it up. The envelope felt older than it should have. The edges were worn, creased, handled many times. My pulse quickened as I carefully opened it. Inside was a folded document and a smaller photograph. I looked at the photograph first. The moment I saw it, confusion swept through me. It showed my Aunt Linda standing outside a diner back in our hometown. The image looked old, probably taken around the same time Adrian disappeared. I frowned. Why are you showing me a picture of my aunt? Adrian leaned back slightly. Turn it over. My stomach tightened. I flipped the photograph. A date was written on the back in faded ink. Along with a name I recognized immediately. Harold Vance. My breath caught. Harold Vance had been one of the wealthiest men in our county. He owned half the commercial properties in town and seemed connected to everyone important. More importantly, he had been a close friend of my family for years. I do not understand, I whispered. Read the document. Carefully, I unfolded the paper. It was a copy of an old financial record. Most of it meant nothing to me. Numbers, signatures, account references. Then my eyes found two names. Linda Carter, Harold Vance. Beneath them was a transaction dated 3 days before Adrian vanished. I stared at it, then read it again. The room suddenly felt smaller. What is this? My voice barely worked. Adrian's expression remained calm, but I could see tension beneath the surface. It took me years to find those records. I looked up sharply. Find what? His jaw tightened. Proof that our separation was not an accident. For several seconds I simply stared at him. The words refused to make sense. My mind searched desperately for another explanation. There had to be one. There always had been. People moved away. Families relocated. Relationships ended. Life happened. Those were normal explanations. Those were explanations I had spent 12 years forcing myself to accept. Adrian was offering something entirely different. Something far more disturbing. You are saying somebody planned this? I asked. I am saying somebody wanted us apart. Rain continued tapping against the windows. Somewhere beyond the dining room, a server laughed at a customer's joke. The ordinary sounds only made the conversation feel more unreal. I looked back down at the document. My aunt's name seemed to blur before my eyes. Linda had practically helped raise me after my parents worked long shifts. She attended every school event, every birthday, every graduation ceremony. She had comforted me when Adrian disappeared. She had held me while I cried. No, I said quietly. There has to be another explanation. Adrian nodded slowly. That was my first reaction too. The words unsettled me even more because they sounded sincere. Not manipulative. Not calculated. Just honest. What happened? I asked. Adrian exhaled slowly. 3 years after I left, I learned someone had been paid to make sure all communication between us disappeared. My heart hammered against my ribs. Communication? Letters. Messages. Information. He paused. Everything. I felt dizzy. Memories rushed back all at once. Countless nights staring at my phone. Countless days checking the mailbox. Countless months wondering why Adrian never answered. Suddenly, one terrible possibility appeared in my mind. I wrote to you. I whispered. Adrian's eyes softened. I know. My breath caught. How? Because eventually I found some of them. The room tilted beneath me. 12 years of certainty began cracking apart. Every assumption, every explanation, every painful conclusion I had built my life around. Adrian reached into his jacket once more. This time he removed a small bundle tied together with a faded blue ribbon. My hand started shaking before he even placed it on the table. I recognized my handwriting immediately. And suddenly the question that terrified me most was no longer why Adrian left. It was who had spent 12 years making sure we never found our way back to each other. I stared at the bundle for what felt like an eternity. The faded blue ribbon looked painfully familiar. My hands trembled as I reached for it. Somewhere deep inside, I already knew what I was holding. I just was not ready to admit it. Slowly, I untied the ribbon. The first envelope appeared. Then another. And another. Different dates. Different stamps. Different years. All addressed to Adrian Mercer. All written by me. My vision blurred instantly. No, I whispered. No, that is impossible. Adrian remained silent. He let me read. The first envelope had never been opened. The second still carried a postmark from 11 years earlier. The third contained handwriting I barely recognized anymore. Younger, hopeful, desperate. My throat tightened as memories rushed back. Nights spent sitting on my bed writing letters I never expected anyone else to understand. Pages filled with questions, updates about school, stories about home, birthdays, graduations. Every letter had ended the same way. I hope you are okay. I folded the envelope carefully before my hands gave out completely. You never received these? I asked. Adrian shook his head. Not when they were sent. I looked down again. Years of grief suddenly felt different. Not gone. Worse. Because grief at least had an explanation. This felt like theft. Someone had stolen the truth from both of us. How many? I asked quietly. 37. The number hit me harder than I expected. 37 attempts. 37 chances to reconnect. 37 moments that had disappeared into silence. I pressed my fingers against my forehead. The room felt too small. The air too heavy. How did you find them? Adrian exhaled slowly. 3 years ago, I hired someone to investigate everything surrounding my disappearance. I looked up. Everything. Everything. His voice remained steady. I wanted facts. Not rumors. Not assumptions. Facts. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. The sound suddenly felt strangely comforting. Something constant in a world that no longer made sense. Adrian leaned forward slightly. The investigation uncovered financial records first, then phone records, then private correspondence. His jaw tightened. Eventually, it led back to Harold Vance. The name sent a chill through me. Harold had attended family barbecues, school fundraisers, church events. He had always seemed respected, trusted. Why would he care about us? I asked. Adrian's expression darkened. Because my father refused a business arrangement Harold wanted. I frowned. What does that have to do with me? At first, I thought nothing. He paused. Then we discovered Harold and your aunt had been communicating regularly during the exact period we lost contact. My stomach dropped. I wanted to reject it. I wanted to defend her. But the photograph and record sat on the table between us. Real. Tangible. Impossible to ignore. Linda loved me. I said quietly. I know. Adrian answered immediately. That is what makes this difficult. His response surprised me. There was no accusation in his voice. No bitterness. Only sadness. The investigation uncovered payments, he continued. Several large transfers. I closed my eyes. For what? Adrian looked directly at me. To keep us apart. The words settled over the table like a storm cloud. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then something occurred to me. A memory. Small. Forgotten. Yet suddenly important. The summer after you disappeared, I said slowly. Linda kept insisting I should move on. Adrian remained silent. I continued thinking aloud. Every time I talked about finding you, she discouraged it. Every single time. The realization made my chest ache. Had she known? Had she been carrying that secret all these years? Had she watched me suffer and said nothing? The questions hurt almost as much as the answers. Adrian reached into his jacket again. This time he removed a small notebook. The cover looked worn from age. There is something else. My pulse quickened. What? Adrian placed the notebook on the table. This belonged to Harold Vance. I stared at it. What is inside? Adrian's eyes held mine. Names. Dates. Meetings. His voice lowered slightly. And one entry from 12 years ago that changes everything. My hand hovered above the notebook. Fear mixed with curiosity. Every instinct told me the next page would reveal something I could never unlearn. Adrian watched me carefully before speaking again. Emma, if you open that notebook, there is no going back to the version of the story you believed your entire life. I swallowed hard, then slowly placed my fingers on the cover. Because for the first time in 12 years, the truth felt closer than the lies. My fingers trembled against the notebook cover. The worn leather felt strangely heavy, as if it carried 12 years of unanswered questions inside its pages. Adrian remained silent. He did not pressure me. He simply waited. Finally, I opened it. The first few pages contained names I did not recognize. Dates. Locations. Notes written in neat handwriting. Nothing immediately meaningful. Then I turned another page. My breath caught. There was my name. Emma Carter. Written clearly across the top of the page. Beneath it was a date. The exact week Adrian disappeared. I stared at it so long the words began to blur. Keep reading, Adrian said quietly. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The next line felt like a punch to the chest. Subject remains emotionally attached. Separation should be maintained. I read it twice. Then a third time. My stomach dropped. Those words were not describing a business deal. They were describing me. Describing us. My eyes moved lower down the page. Additional communication intercepted successfully. No direct contact established. Continue monitoring. The restaurant seemed to disappear around me. The rain. The voices. The soft music. Everything faded. There was only the notebook and the horrible realization growing inside me. Somebody had treated my life like a project. Like a problem to be managed. Like a story that needed a different ending. I do not understand, I whispered. Why would anyone do this? Adrian's expression tightened. Because keeping us apart benefited people with their own agendas. I looked up sharply. What agendas? Before he could answer, my phone suddenly vibrated inside my apron pocket. The sound made me jump. Neither of us had been expecting it. I glanced at the screen. My stomach immediately tightened. Aunt Linda. For a moment, I simply stared at the name. It felt impossible. As though the universe had chosen the exact worst moment for her to call. Adrian noticed my reaction immediately. What is it? He asked. I swallowed hard. It is Linda. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. Not anger. Not surprise. More like concern. The phone continued vibrating. I almost declined the call. Almost. But some instinct made me answer. Hello. Silence greeted me at first. Then Linda's familiar voice filled the line. Emma, sweetheart, where are you? The question sounded normal, casual, yet something about it immediately felt wrong. I am at work. Another pause. Are you alone? My pulse quickened. I looked across the table at Adrian. His attention sharpened instantly. What? I asked. Linda hesitated. No reason. I was just checking on you. Her voice sounded strained, nervous, completely unlike the woman who had always seemed so confident. My grip tightened around the phone. Linda, is something wrong? The silence that followed lasted only 2 seconds. It felt much longer. Then she exhaled shakily. Emma, there are things I need to explain. Every muscle in my body froze. Adrian sat perfectly still, listening, waiting. My heart hammered against my ribs. Explain what? I whispered. Another long pause. Then Linda said the one thing I never expected to hear. I never wanted it to happen this way. Tears immediately burned behind my eyes. Not because I understood what she meant. Because I already knew. Somehow deep down I knew. The notebook, the letters, the records, the lies. They were all leading to the same place. Linda's voice trembled. Emma, please do not make any decisions until we talk face to face. My throat tightened. Talk about what? She inhaled sharply. Then came the answer. The answer that shattered whatever remained of the life I thought I understood. About why Adrian had to leave. The call ended before I could respond. For several seconds I sat completely motionless. The phone remained frozen in my hand. Across the table, Adrian looked just as stunned as I felt. Slowly, I lowered the phone. My eyes drifted back toward the notebook, toward my own name written across those pages, toward 12 years of deception finally beginning to unravel. Then Adrian spoke softly. Emma. I looked up. His expression had changed. The calm control I had seen since his return was gone. For the first time, he looked genuinely worried. If Linda is ready to talk, he said carefully, then something has changed. A chill ran through me. What do you mean? Adrian held my gaze. I mean, people do not protect secrets for 12 years unless they are afraid of what happens when the truth finally comes out. I barely remember how the rest of my shift ended. The minutes blurred together beneath the weight of everything I had learned. Customers came and went. Orders were delivered. Checks were signed. Yet my mind remained trapped inside that private dining room, replaying Linda's words over and over again. About why Adrian had to leave. Not chose to leave. Not wanted to leave. Had to leave. The difference felt enormous. By the time Bellefonte closed for the night, the rain had stopped. The city streets glistened beneath reflections of neon signs and streetlights. Most of the staff had already gone home. I stood alone near the front entrance gathering my things when Adrian appeared beside me. I do not think you should be alone tonight, he said quietly. Under different circumstances, the comment might have sounded controlling. Instead, it sounded concerned. Genuine. I looked at him for several seconds before nodding. We walked to a small coffee shop 2 blocks away. It was one of the few places still open after midnight. The smell of fresh coffee and baked pastries filled the air. Soft music played overhead. We chose a corner booth far from everyone else. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, I looked up. Tell me everything. Adrian wrapped both hands around a coffee cup. His expression grew distant. After I disappeared, I spent years believing you had moved on. The words hurt more than they should have. What? I asked. He laughed softly without humor. Because that is exactly what I was told. My chest tightened. Adrian continued. Every message I managed to send disappeared. Every attempt to learn about your life somehow led nowhere. Eventually, people started presenting evidence. Evidence. I repeated. He nodded. Stories. Information. Claims that you were happy. That you were building a new life. That contacting you would only create problems. I stared at him in disbelief. And you believed that? Pain flickered across his face. At first, no. Then enough years passed that it became easier to accept than questioning everything. The honesty in his answer made my heart ache. Because I understood. I had done the same thing. We had both built entire lives around lies we never knew were lies. Adrian reached into his wallet. Carefully, he removed a folded piece of paper. Unlike the letters from before, this one looked fragile from being opened countless times. He slid it across the table. What is it? I asked. The last letter I ever wrote to you. My breath caught. Slowly I unfolded it. The date at the top made my stomach twist. 12 years ago. 3 weeks after his disappearance. The handwriting was unmistakably Adrian's. I began reading. Every sentence felt like a ghost reaching across time. He wrote about missing me, about wanting to explain, about promising he would find his way back once things were safe. At the bottom sat a sentence that shattered what remained of my defenses. I love you too much to let you become part of this mess. Tears blurred the page instantly. I lowered the letter before I completely lost control. Across the table, Adrian looked away toward the window. I never stopped looking for answers, Emma. His voice was barely above a whisper. Not because I wanted my old life back. Because something never felt right. I swallowed hard. And now, Adrian finally met my eyes. The years seemed to disappear from his face. For one brief moment, I saw the 17-year-old boy from Miller Lake. The boy who had believed in impossible futures. Now I know we did not lose 12 years because we stopped caring, he said softly. We lost 12 years because someone stole them from us. The words settled between us. Heavy. Painful. True. Then my phone lit up again on the table. Another message from Linda. This time there were only 6 words. Meet me tomorrow. I will confess everything. The next afternoon arrived faster than I wanted. I spent the entire morning replaying memories I no longer trusted. Every conversation, every piece of advice, every moment Linda had comforted me after Adrian disappeared. By noon, I no longer knew which memories belonged to truth and which belonged to the story someone had carefully built around me. The meeting was set for 3 o'clock at a small lakeside cafe just outside town. The same lake where Adrian and I had once spent entire summers dreaming about the future. The irony was impossible to ignore. When I arrived, Linda was already there. She looked older than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally, like someone who had been carrying a weight for far too long. The moment she saw me, tears filled her eyes. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered the words I never expected to hear. I am sorry. I sat across from her slowly. Tell me everything. Linda nodded. Her hands trembled around a coffee cup. 12 years ago, Harold Vance approached me. My chest tightened immediately. What? Linda closed her eyes briefly. Because he knew our family was struggling financially. He knew I was desperate. He offered help. The answer hurt exactly as much as I expected. She continued before I could respond. At first I thought it was harmless. He only asked me to pass along information. Then the requests became larger. Tears rolled down her cheeks. By the time I realized what was happening, I was trapped in lies I did not know how to escape. I stared at her silently. Linda looked down at the table. The letters started arriving. Letters from Adrian. Letters for Adrian. Harold made sure they never reached their destination. My throat tightened painfully. And you helped him? Linda nodded. The shame on her face looked genuine. Yes. The single word felt devastating. Not because it surprised me anymore. Because hearing it made everything real. Why now? I asked quietly. Why tell the truth after all these years? Linda looked directly at me. Because I spent 12 years watching you grieve someone who never stopped loving you. The words hit me harder than any accusation could have. She reached into her purse and carefully removed a small envelope. There is one more thing. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Adrian's. My breath caught. What is this? Linda pushed it toward me. The last letter that was intercepted. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single page. The paper had yellowed with age. The ink had faded slightly. Yet every word remained clear. Adrian wrote about hope. About finding his way back. About believing that someday the truth would surface. At the very bottom sat a sentence that made tears blur my vision. If fate is kind, we will meet again when nobody can stand between us. I lowered the letter slowly. For several moments nobody spoke. The lake shimmered beyond the cafe windows. Sunlight danced across the water exactly the way it had 12 years earlier. Some things changed. Some things did not. When I finally looked up, Adrian was standing outside near the shoreline. He had given us privacy, given Linda the chance to tell the truth herself. Linda followed my gaze and smiled sadly. He came back every year. I blinked. What? Every year? She nodded. He visited the lake. He asked questions. He searched for answers. Fresh tears filled my eyes. Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. The greatest mistake of my life was helping separate two people who never stopped choosing each other. A few minutes later, I walked outside. Adrian stood near the water with his hands in his pockets. The afternoon breeze stirred the surface of the lake. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I handed him the letter. Adrian looked at it and smiled softly. I remember writing that. I laughed through tears. You were always dramatic, only when it mattered. We stood there together watching the sunlight stretch across the water. No grand speeches, no impossible promises, just truth. Finally, after 12 years, Adrian reached into his jacket and removed 2 airline tickets. I stared at them in disbelief. What is this? He smiled. Do you remember the trip we planned when we were 17? I looked down at the destination printed on the tickets. The exact city we used to talk about beneath summer skies and impossible dreams. My heart squeezed painfully. Adrian's voice softened. I kept the reservation idea longer than I should have. I laughed again. This time it felt lighter, freer, as if a door that had been locked for years had finally opened. The sun continued sinking toward the horizon. The lake reflected gold and silver. And standing beside the man I had once lost, I finally understood something important. First love does not always return to begin again. Sometimes it returns to finish the story that should have never been interrupted in the first place.